this is a video tutorial for the exercise called Daisy Me Rollin. It's an Illustrator exercise using the pen tool. We'll also talk about the pencil tool, brushes, and the gradient tool as well. So we're going to create something that looks a bit like this. So go over to Moodle, I'm in the Illustrator tab, Illustrator exercises, scroll down. So at first you'll see intro to pen tool exercises. Do these first if you haven't yet. They give you a good introduction to the pen tool. And then further down here is the Daisy Me Rollin exercise. So click on this JPEG, it'll download automatically for you. And then there's a little list here explaining what to do, but that's what I'm about to talk through now. So we're going to Illustrator, start a new file, so File, New. Up the top here, go into Print, select A4. If you want to double check it's the size that you want, change this to millimeters, and you want to have 210 by 297. That's really all you need to set here, but I'll just explain this bottom part because it's kind of important later on. So the color mode, since I got this from the print menu, the color mode is CMYK and the raster resolution is 300 ppi. We're working in vector, so that's not a huge drama, but if you were creating a file that was for print, you want to make sure it's in CMYK, although there is some debate about that, but the 300 ppi is important. But yes, don't stress too much for this exercise, just so you know that for future reference, not all Illustrator documents are created equal, same as Photoshop documents. You want to double check your color mode and your resolution. So I'm just going to click create, and then I get a new A4 page. So now we're going to place that JPEG that we downloaded so we can use that to trace from. So file, place. And in my downloads folder, I've got that JPEG, selecting that, and clicking place. Now it gives you a little preview thumbnail. It hasn't actually placed it in yet. It will place from kind of the top left. So if I want this to sit perfectly on the page, I'm going to click into the top left of this page. If you click somewhere else, it's fine. Like if it ends up over here, that's okay. Make sure you're on the black arrow and just click and drag it into position. It should sit nicely on your A4 page. And we're going to lock this layer down. So over here to your layers panel. Actually, before we get any further, I'll just mention that I'm in Workspace Essentials Classic. So if you're not set to Essentials Classic, make sure you're selecting that. You might need to hit Reset Essentials Classic if you had panels all over the place or it got a bit messy. Just reset your workspace. We'll put it back to default. So this icon here with the two little squares on top of each other, when you roll over it says Layers. That's our Layers panel. I actually like to expand these out. These top little these arrows in the corner, expand panels, opens this whole panel out. Sometimes it can feel like it's getting in the way, but if you're trying to look for something, it makes it a bit easier when you expand it out. So now I can see my layers panel is here, and we've got layer 1, and that's what the image is on. I'm going to lock this, so just next to the eye, when you roll over it says toggles lock, and when you click on it you get this little padlock symbol pop up indicating that layer is now locked. So now we're going to create a new layer so that we can trace on a separate layer. And so this little plus sign down the bottom, create new layer, click on that, and now we've got our second layer. You could name these if you like, if you double click on the name. So you could call this template or sketch or something. It doesn't really matter, whatever makes sense to you. And this top layer, you could call it trace. It's a good habit to get into, naming your layers, so you can keep track of things, because once you start working on more complex jobs and adding more layers, it's really easy to lose track of your layers. So if you're labeling them straight away, it's a nice habit. Okay, and the reason we're locking that down is so that we can't accidentally move this around. So if you didn't have this locked and we were drawing and then selecting things, you can move this around really easily accidentally. So that's why we're locking it down. Make sure you've got the trace layer or your second layer selected. if you're on this layer and then you pick up the pen tool, see how there's like a circle with a cross? It won't let me do anything because I'm on the locked layer. So make sure you're selecting your trace layer, and then that will let you draw whatever you like. Okay, I'm just going to delete that. Another thing to set up before we start tracing is the fill and stroke. So the fill is black at the moment and the stroke, there is no stroke. I want to change that. So I want to make it so it has no fill, and I'm going to make the stroke a color. I'm going to do it in the swatches panel. So because the stroke is sitting in front, I can now change that color. And now I've got a green stroke with no fill. And that makes it a bit easier when you're tracing. If you've got a fill on when you're tracing, it will fill the shape as you draw, and sometimes it'll hide what you're trying to trace. So make sure you've got the stroke on something and the fill off. Okay, let's start down the bottom of this page. Actually, we're going to start with this little vase here. So zooming on in. Just a reminder, sorry, I'll do that again. So to zoom in, you can select the zoom tool in the toolbar, click and let go, or you can click and drag left and right to zoom in. The keyboard shortcut to zoom is the spacebar plus command, or if you're on a PC, it'll be spacebar and control. And that, see my cursor change to a zoom, so the same thing, click and let go, or click and drag left and right. Make sure you're going left and right. If you're just sort of trying to you go up and down, it doesn't work. It has to be left and right. If you're using the keyboard shortcuts, spacebar command to zoom in, and then to zoom out, you hold the Alt. See how it changes to a minus. If you get all over the place with the zooming, you can end up being like too far, or you get lost. The shortcut command 0 will fit the page into your view. So that's a nice little shortcut, command 0 or control 0 on a PC. Okay, so we're going to zoom in on this area, and I'm going to select my pen tool. Now the pen tool's a really great tool to learn, but it can be a frustrating tool to learn. So it's okay if in the beginning you kind of hate it a little bit. It's kind of part of the process of learning the pen tool is to hate it a bit. But I promise it gets easier the more that you practice and the more that you get the hang of it. It can take like a little bit just to actually get to that point to get the hang of it. So if you find yourself control Zing a lot, so undoing, that's completely normal and completely fine, because it's one of those tools that if you accidentally click places, you'll end up with extra anchor points and different things happening. So yes, it's okay that you're like, oops, that's totally fine. Yes, okay, let's start. I don't want to tell you too much. So you can see on my cursor it's changed into this like calligraphy pen nib, and it also has this asterisk little star next to it, and that's indicating we're going to start a new path. So there's a few other little symbols that'll pop up on the cursor that mean different things when you're using the pen tool. So this asterisk is showing new path. So I'm going to start on a corner. I always like to start on a corner. And the main thing to know about the pen tool is every time you click, you're creating an anchor point. So if I click here, that's created an anchor point. So that was a click and let go. For drawing straight lines, you click and let go. To draw curved lines, you click and drag. So I'm going to start with this top part. It's a straight line. So click and let go. Now for this next line, I want to draw a curved line. So I'm going to click and drag. When I roll over to the anchor point, it's a bit hard to see, but see how the cursor now has like a little arrow next to it? If I roll over, it disappears. When I'm on the anchor point, you get this little like beak arrow thing popping up. That's showing I can add handles to this, and handles will let me create a curve. So hover over the anchor point, click and drag, and I want my curve to go in this direction. So I'm dragging a handle. This is a handle. It's not the rubber band. they look similar, but this is indicating where my curve is about to go. So I'm going to drag it down here. I'm guessing, I don't know exactly how far. You do get a better feel for it the more you use the pen tool. So I'm going to let go here. And now this is the rubber band that is indicating, it's predicting where my curve is going to go, where my path will go. So I'm going to draw the next anchor point in the middle here. You could put an anchor point here, here. That's another thing you'll get a feel for, is where you want to place anchor points. The main thing is you don't want to make too many anchor points. So you wouldn't go click, 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 click all the way down here. You want to try and make minimal amount of anchor points. So I'm going to put one in the middle at the bottom here. I'm going to click and drag and see how that's going to change my curve. It's okay if it doesn't get exactly onto the sketch the first time. We're going to go and edit it in a minute. So I'm just going to draw this out to here, let go, and then I'm going back to my first point to close this path, and that's shown by that circle. So when I roll off, it disappears, and then that little circle that pops up, that's showing that it's closing the path. So this will become a shape. So I'm going to click and drag so I can show you what it does. Oh no, I didn't. Okay. Sometimes when you click and drag on the close path, it'll add a handle to this side, but this time it didn't do it. That's really nice. Okay, direct selection tool to go and edit this curve. So I'm going to click on the path that shows up my handles, and then I can adjust this curve as I need to. This one on the bottom will seesaw because they're joined. So if I change one side, the other side also goes. That's okay for this. It'll create a nice curve. A nice smooth curve along the bottom of this vase. Clicking on this path here to bring up these handles. It's okay if it's not exact, this is just a rough guide. Around there is pretty good, I'm happy with that. So use the black arrow, click off, and now we've got our first shape. Let's go up to the flower. I'm just scrolling up to the top left is our flower. And I'll show you how we're going to do this one. So I'm creating a new path. There's a little asterisk star. I'm going to start in the corner here. Click and drag up. You can see the rubber band predicting where I'm going to go. The next point here, click and drag. Again, doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just giving it a general shape to begin with, and then I'll go and edit it. And then you can see I want to draw this next petal, but the curve's going the wrong way. So to edit this handle, I'm going to hold the Option on my keyboard. It changes into that little beak arrow. Click and drag this handle in this direction so my curve goes this way. And then you can see, I let go of my keyboard then, the rubber band is now curving this way. So click and drag to get that next petal. See, this handle's facing the wrong way, my curve's going the wrong way, so I'm going to hold the Option on my keyboard, click and drag that handle towards this next curve, and now my rubber band is facing the right way. Click and drag, hold the Option, click and drag to the next petal, click and drag. If at any point you accidentally click somewhere else, see how it keeps drawing? So I'm going to use Command Z on my keyboard, or you can go to Edit, Undo, and that will undo to a certain point. You just want to make sure that you still got this rubber band happening so it continues the path. So I'm holding the Option, swinging this handle around, and now I'm going to close this path. Now this one, this should do what I was kind of mentioning before. When I click and drag, see how the first curve I drew, it goes with it and it wants to go all strange like this. The way to avoid that is to hold the Option key first. So I'm going to hold the Option key or Alt key on my keyboard. Then I'm going over this anchor point to close the path. So that circle, close the path. Click and drag. And because I'm holding the Option key already, it's disconnected this handle from this one. Whereas before they were doing that seesaw thing where they're joined. But when you hold the Option, it disconnects it. Okay, so I'm going to use the selection tool to go and edit this. And I want to explain the difference between using the direct selection tool to edit your handles or the anchor point tool. So I'm just going to scroll up here a bit so we can do another little test. So the pen tool, because when we drew this one, because we were holding the option, it was disconnecting the handles, like disconnecting that seesaw. I'm just going to do a little demo up here when it has a seesaw. So this nice smooth curve here. Oh, actually just want to move the whole thing, wrong arrow. Okay, so direct selection arrow, the white arrow, when I click on the anchor points and change these handles, see how it's doing a seesaw? It's changing the handles on both sides of the anchor point. Same with this one, if I click here, it will change both sides, which is nice when you want a smooth curve. But for this, we're not creating a smooth curve. We had points, these points, and then a curve, and then points, and then a curve. So all kind of like corners. So if you right click on the pen tool, go down to the anchor point tool, this is how we can affect the handles separately. So if I click anywhere along the path to get these handles to pop up. Now when I click and drag this handle, see how it's not seesawing, it's like separate to the other side of the handle. So using the anchor point tool is how you can edit handles, curve handles, separately from each other without it seesawing. So it really depends on what you're doing as to how you, like which one you choose. But now if I use the direct selection tool, because these have been like broken apart, it won't go back to seesaw. They're broken forever. I don't know how to rejoin them actually. Once they're kind of disconnected, that's kind of it. Which if you're trying to create a smooth curve, it's really tricky because see, it will put like a little kink in your line in your path. So that's the difference between the selection tool and the anchor point tool. Sorry, direct selection tool, and your anchor point tool. So I'm just going to delete that. And let's go back to readjusting these. So for this, because they're already disconnected, you can use either. The nice thing with the direct selection tool is you can also just pick up the path and drag the whole path around if that's something you want to do, as well as change the handles. The one thing with the anchor point tool, even though it's called an anchor point tool, you don't actually affect the anchor points with this, you affect the handles. And if you click on an anchor point with the anchor point tool, like I'm about to do here, it actually takes away the curve handles. It deletes them. So this is a pain when you want your curves, but if it's something you want to do, you want to get rid of these handles and make a straight line, that's a great way to do that. And it's also a great way to add them back on. So now I can click and drag, add the handles back on, and I can edit it here. So the anchor point tool is handy if you have a straight line and you want to make it curved. You can add handles, or if you've got a curved line that you want to make straight, you want to remove these curve handles, you can do that with the anchor point tool. So really I think it should be called an anchor handle tool, or think of it as an anchor handle tool more than an anchor point tool, considering that you probably don't really want to click on the anchor points. With the anchor point tool, good job naming that, Adobe. Alright, so I'm just going around and tweaking this, and you can do the same for yours. So that's why you don't have to be too precious when you're first drawing it. Just get the points in, get the curves rough, and then you always go back and tweak it later on. Okay, that's looking pretty good. And then the circle, you can also use the pen tool. So I'm going to right click up here, pen tool, click and drag, and then close the path, click and drag. So for this circle, I'm going to use the direct selection arrow to tweak these because I want it to seesaw. If I used, I'm going to right click on the pen tool. If I use the anchor point tool to edit this, see how you can end up with a bit of a corner here? A bit of a point, I should say, a bit of a point. Whereas I want it to be nice and smooth. I'm just going to undo that. So when you want a curve to be smooth either side of the anchor point, I would use the direct selection tool and keep that seesaw happening. Okay. For the straight line here, you can use the pen tool again. You can also use this tool here next to the type tool. It's a line segment tool and it just draws straight lines. So if I click and drag, it will draw a straight line. Just going to scroll down, make that a bit longer. And now I've got my stem. I'll just make that a different color, a bit easier to see. You can also change the stroke. So in the stroke panel here, change the weight. And then we've got a straight line. So that's just a different way to draw a straight line. You could also use the pen tool. Okay, let's talk about the pencil tool. I'm going to go over to this flower to demonstrate the pencil tool. So it's hiding under the shaper tool. So right click on the shaper tool, select the pencil tool. And the pencil tool is more suitable for free form drawing. The pen tool is for really precise work, or for lots of different things really. But the pen tool is more for, like I say, freeform drawing. So the difference between the pen tool and the pencil tool, or one main difference, is the pencil tool will draw a line wherever you're clicking and dragging. So whereas the pen tool is you're clicking to make anchor points, just zoom in here, the pencil tool, when I click and drag, I'm just going to trace over this line. That's where it draws a line. So I'm just going to change that stroke back down to 1. So that was clicking and dragging. So I'll do the same thing here. Click and drag, let go, and it's drawing the line wherever I'm tracing. Okay, so that's how we get our paths drawing with the pencil tool. For this one, because I want there to be a point on the end of this petal, that's why I was drawing one side and then the other side, because we're going to undo that. If you kind of hold down your mouse the whole way, say you want to draw here and I'm holding it down, holding it down, holding it down, keep going. Oh, that was a bit wonky, but that's okay, keep going. See how it didn't make a point on the end? It kind of made a rounded edge, and I want it to be a point. So I can undo that. That's where I find the technique for this flower, at least. Wherever you want to point, that's as far as I'm going to draw. So I'm just drawing the kind of arcs. Making sure that when I'm clicking again to draw the next side, that the next little icon that I can tell you about, see how on the pencil tool it's got that little diagonal line. When I scroll off it says asterisk, that says it's going to draw a new line. When you hold over and it has that diagonal line, that's indicating it's going to continue that path. So the pen tool has that same icon tool too. So if you go over an anchor point, see that diagonal line, that means this pen tool is going to continue drawing that line because this is selected. I'm just going to go to the black arrow. If I had nothing selected and then picked up the pencil tool and wanted to keep drawing, it wouldn't know to continue this line even though I'm hovering right over it because it's not selected, it's not active. So select it first, then pencil tool, then I can get that continue line icon popping up. So you can see here I didn't draw it perfectly on. Another thing with the pencil tool is you can redraw a line just by kind of, so I'm going to click and drag. You can kind of redraw it because I've got this path selected and active and I'm drawing really closely to it. It lets me edit this path just by clicking and dragging over it to kind of have another go. So you can do that over here. Oh, it does that sometimes too though. So because I was going a bit too far away, it thought I wanted this to kind of carry on from there. So just be careful when you're editing. You want to kind of stay close to the original path. And that one was because I didn't draw around the corner. So you might find, let's see, if I go into the V, it's fine. Yeah, you might find some little strange things like that happening with the pencil tool when you're trying to redraw. But that's the general gist. It's kind of a fun one to use. It can be a bit tricky with a mouse. It's really nice to use with a Wacom tablet, but it's fine to use with a mouse too. There's some other options with the pencil tool. If you double click, oh, I should have checked this. Mine's actually set to smooth. The default is in the middle, this fidelity between accurate and smooth. I'll show you what that does. So if I change this all the way down to accurate, and then I'll just demo over this to the side. If I draw a squiggly line, it puts anchor points and draws the path exactly where I was drawing. And it can be a bit wonky. See how I've got some little kinks in the line here because it's pretty much exactly where I was putting my mouse. Double click on that pencil again, change the fidelity to smooth. When I draw a line, even try to make it really messy, it'll try to smooth it out for me. So it's trying to make minimal anchor points. I wonder if you can hear my cat meowing. I hope not. Anyway, so when it's on smooth, it'll make less anchor points, which I can show you with the direct selection tool. See, they pop up there. So it'll try to create a smoother line for you, which is nice for this. It really depends what you're doing, whether you want it to be smooth or not. So that was double click. You can change that. So by default, it'll be in the middle. I was using this earlier, so it was already on smooth for me. Another thing in here is this keep selected tick box. So that's what I was saying before about when I was drawing. Let's just select that. So when you draw a line, it keeps it selected and you can continue drawing and it will join it to that line. If you change this to off, so untick the keep selected, when you draw, just deselect that. So I was going to draw over here, click and drag. See how that line's not selected? So if I wanted to join it together, these are not joined. These are separate paths. Which sometimes when you're drawing a lot of lines next to each other, so if I had something that had a lot of detail and I was drawing it with the pencil tool and I wanted to draw a bunch of lines together, I can do that. See how these just go right over each other? When I've got the keep selected turned on and I draw a line, draw a line, draw a line, sometimes you can end up editing the past line, or like this is just joined onto that line rather than draw a new line like this. See how this one just edit this line? So it really depends on what you're doing if you want it to do that or not. So for some things it can be quite frustrating that it's still selected, and for some things it's really nice. Another thing I'll show you quickly is if you do have separate lines that you didn't realize they weren't connected, you can join them together. So I'm going to use the direct selection tool. Select the anchor points that you want to join. So I want the last anchor point from this line and the last anchor point from this line. I'm going to click and drag, select them both. You can tell because they're filled in, as opposed to these ones which are just outlines. Right click, join. and that will join those 2 points. So I might just demonstrate that with 2 paths that are further away from each other. If I drag these 2 far away, direct selection arrow, selecting this anchor point. In this case, I'm going to hold the shift to select both, so yeah, they're both selected, or you could click and drag over the 2 ends, right click, and then join. And it will join it with a straight line. So if you needed to add curve handles to this, you could use the anchor point tool to add handles. Click and drag for that. But yep, that's how you can join 2 anchor points together or 2 paths together. You can also do it with the pen tool. So if I joined these 2 lines together, I'll select the pen tool. You want to make sure that line is selected, then get that little diagonal line to pop up, which shows it's going to continue the path. Then find the point I want to join it to, and that will join those 2 anchor points together as well. So undo that. Okay, another thing with the pencil tool is if there's any areas, I'm trying to find a rough bit, maybe here. So maybe I want to smooth out this part of the line. If you right click on the pencil tool, there's a smooth tool. So for this, you kind of want to click and drag in the direction that you want to smooth. Like you were using your finger to like draw over the line to smooth it out. So I'm going to click and drag to try and make this line a bit smoother. Maybe up here. You've got to be careful on the points. If you use the smooth tool, sometimes it'll get rid of the point. It'll make it more like this. I mean, it's not that. Yeah, there we go. So you can get like a whole bunch of extra anchor points showing up that you might not really want. But it's good for if there's like any little kinks in the line that you just want to smooth out. The smooth tool is a nice option for that. So that was just right click. It's right below the pencil tool. Okay, so that's all about the pencil tool and the pen tool. Let's go into making some arrangements. So I've got a little one I prepared earlier in here. So we can put our shapes together. So to begin with, what you want to do is, so this flower is made up of the circle, these petals and this line. I'm going to group them all together so that I can move it all at once. Whereas at the moment, if I click and drag, it's just moving that one piece, and I want to move all of this together. So click and drag, right click, group. It's also located in object, group. If I just undo that, object, now it's highlighted, group. Oh, sorry, now it's available. And that means when I click and drag on any part of this, the whole, all 3 of those shapes will now move. We can also add some color. So now that these are grouped, if I want to add color to one particular part or edit one particular part, I'm going to double click and it puts it into isolation mode. This gray bar at the top shows isolation mode. Click on the shape I want to change the color. Oh, let's not make it too horrendous. Okay, that's a bit nicer. You can turn the stroke off as well. I'm doing this in the swatches panel, but there are a few other places you can do it, in the toolbar, up the top in the control bar, or in the properties bar over here. So wherever you like to change your colors. I'm going to leave that on green. Double click to get out of isolation mode. So when it's in isolation mode, you can't click anything else. See, like over here, because it's not inside that group, I can't change anything else. So double click to get out of that. That grey bar disappears, and now I can grab other things. I'm going to do the same grouping with this. For this one, I'm going to group the leaves and the stems separately. So I've just selected all the leafy bits. Right click, group. And this is also really nice when you want to change the color to be all the same. So I'm going to make these all green. The stroke I'm happy with. Another thing to check with the stroke is, so under the stroke panel here, click the 3 lines, show options, and it brings up all these stroke options. So the default is actually the default cap, I should say, is this first one, butt cap. I had it on round, so see the end of the line, it's really square, and I want to soften it a bit. If you select round cap, it gives it a rounded edge. The last one, projecting cap, is square, but it goes out past the anchor point, whereas this one ends right on the anchor point. There's also settings for the corners. You can have a rounded corner, a squared corner, a bevel corner. So that's just something else you can play with. I'm going to select all these stems. So I'm holding the shift key for this and then clicking on the stems, right click, group, so that's an easy way that if I need to move anything, I've got the leaves separate so I can change the color, this stems separate so I can change the stroke color on these, remembering that the stems you want to have a stroke color only. If you put a fill color, it tries to join the ends of the lines up and you might end up with these weird things happening, so turn the fill off for that. And then I want to join the stems and the leaves together, so I'm going to select both, group them together. And now when I click and drag, they all come together. So doing them separately at first is kind of beneficial because now when I go into isolation mode, now I've got the leaves in a group and the stems in a group. Mainly nice for changing the colors. So I'm going to double click off to the side to get out of isolation mode. And then we've got our vase here. Put a fill on there. So you can choose whichever combination of things you like. I've just done the first row, but you could do a few different things. Create a new artboard over to the side. Actually, let's just do one over this side. We'll start fresh. So the artboard tool down here in your toolbar, click and drag to create a page. I'm going to zoom out a bit. Let's use the artboard tool again, get it to the right size. So you can see the width here. I'm going to make this 210. I'm actually going to select this as my reference point, the top right corner. 210 and 297. So that reference point is just saying it's adjusting the size from that corner. Cool, I'm happy with that. And now we can bring our pieces over to make an arrangement. So here's our vase. I'm going to click and drag, hold the Alt key to duplicate because I don't want to lose this. This is kind of my, the original one. I want to copy it. So click and drag, hold the Alt. Same for this, click and drag, hold the Alt. Click and drag, hold the Alt. Because I've got them grouped, they come all together really nicely. And then if you want to rotate these, if you roll your arrow over to the corner, you get that double-ended arrow for rotate. You can resize these. Remember to hold the shift to keep the proportion. If you don't hold the shift, you can end up stretching it really strangely. So hold the shift when you click and drag to resize. I'm going to duplicate this, hold the Alt. This one I'm going to flip around. So right click, transform, reflect. Reflect vertical, it makes it face the other way. Let's get another flower, click and drag, hold the Alt. Of course you could also go to edit, copy, edit, paste, and that would also duplicate. Rotate that, hold the shift to resize. Okay, and this will be fine just for the exercise, but you can arrange these however you like. So see here how the stems are in front of the vase? I want them to be behind the vase. So I'm going to right click on the vase, go to arrange and bring it to the front. So we need to rearrange any of your objects. That's how you would do that. So if you wanted these leaves to sit in front of this flower, I could click the flower, right click, arrange, send to back, and it'll put it behind everything. So you can play around that as well. Let's rotate this. Another thing you can look at is brushes. So brushes are applied to stroke. I'm going to use my direct selection arrow just to select this. That's another way actually that you can select things within a group. So let me just pull this over to the side so I can show you that. So this is a grouped object. If I use the direct selection arrow, the white arrow, it will let you just select things from in with the group without going to isolation mode or ungrouping them. It's just a handy thing to know. But yes, I wanted to talk about brushes. So there's the stroke. Under the swatches panel here is the brushes panel. And you can click through these for different effects, but it will change what your stroke looks like. So if you just scroll through these, you can see different options. There's a lot of like ink brushes type effects or like watercolor brush effects, things like that. You can click on the 3 lines here, go down to open swatch library, and there's a gazillion different brushes. So there's chalk, ink, watercolors, bristle brush. Usually you just use the artistic ones mostly, but if you wanted arrows, that's where you can get arrows. There's like borders and lots of different things. So artistic has some really pretty things. So if I click on any of these, if I choose ink, it'll open up a panel with just ink brushes. So again, I've got this line selected, that's why it's being affected. So if you want to have a play around with those, that's how you can add some funky texture. I'm going to close that just to get it out of the way. So you can have a play around with brushes as well. And then another thing I wanted to show you is gradient. So for the petals, let me direct select. If I wanted to put a gradient fill, it's under the stroke panel, click on gradient. I'm just going to click on this little square here. I'm on my stroke. I want to be on the fill. I'm just going to Command Z that. Make sure your fill is on top. And the default is white to black. We're going to add some colors in here. So this slider here is where you can add colors. So the white, I'm going to double click. You can open up the swatches here, or you can use the eyedropper. I'm going to go back to swatches, and then you can select colors out of your swatches panel. So that changed the left hand side. For the right hand side, I'm going to double click, make it like an orange color. So at the moment it's in linear, which means it's just going in a line. The gradient is just going in a line. Up the top here of the gradient panel, there's some other options. So radial is the next one. It goes in a circle. And then freeform gradient is, it gives you a lot of flexibility, but it can be a bit confusing. So I would stick to linear or radial to begin with. If I change it back to linear, I can show you the angle. So you can also select different angles that the gradient sits at. This. Change it back to radial. So that also has an angle thing, as well as the shape of the radius. So if you change the percentage of this, it kind of goes into like an oval. So when I roll over it, it's an oval now. Before it was a perfect circle. And then you can add, I just clicked on here, I didn't mean to. You can add other colors in here too. So it doesn't just have to be 2 colors. I just did it accidentally. You would have seen if you roll over to that plus sign, so it goes to a white arrow and then a plus sign. When you click, it adds another point. and then if I double click, I think you can double click or right click. Oh no, double click. You can add a color. So if I just add another point here, double click, make this a different color, you can see how that's affecting the gradient here. So you can add as many as you like. If it was in linear, it indicates, or it kind of echoes whatever you see here, you'll see on your shape. You can move these around, click and drag to move the colors around. And then you'll notice in between each color, there's also this other slider, and that kind of shows how much of one color it'll show. Or in the gradient, if you want more purple in between, then you could change these sliders to do that. You can do that even when there's two. Oh, also to remove them, click and drag them away will remove any of those points. So just to show it with two colors, if you click and drag this slider, now there's more orange. If I click and drag it this way, now there's more pink. So you can affect the gradient this way as well. There's also a gradient tool in the toolbar. It's this one here. So if you click on that, it brings up this little line, and it's the same as these sliders here. So if I click and drag the pink in, see how the gradient changes to suit. So this is kind of nice if you want to edit it directly on your objects and you're like, no, I want the orange to go to here, for example. You can physically kind of do that on your object. There's that little middle slider as well. You can also change the angle of your gradient with the gradient tool. So if I click and drag, see how it's drawing that gradient line on my mouse. I can go this way, click and drag. And you can go as far as you want. So if I just want it to go to there, there's like a little gradient, and then it fills the rest in with orange. Or if you want it to go a bit bigger, you can do that too. You can also, if you get your mouse in the right spot, you can rotate this. Oh, there it is. Hang on, let me just draw this a bit shorter. So right on the end, it turns into this circle, and then you can click and drag to change the angle of your gradients, which is quite nice. So you can have a play around with the gradient panel and the gradient tool if you want to add some interest. Bit of warning, you can use gradients for good or evil. Try using for good, please. Don't go crazy with gradients. There's a tasteful way to do it, and then a kind of a tacky way to do it. So just be mindful with how you're using your gradients. Oh, another thing you can do with the gradient slider, let me just get my direct selection. So I just noticed like the pink is on the inside, but I kind of want the orange on the inside. You can click and drag these and move them around and swap them over completely. If you want to swap your gradient around. But yes, they can create some really interesting effects with that. You can also add a gradient to the swatches panel. So I've just flicked this back to the swatches panel here. We were on the brushes before. So say I wanted to apply this gradient to a lot of other objects, rather than trying to recreate it. So if I wanted to make this flower the same, I wouldn't have to try and recreate the gradient. I can add it to my swatches. So this little box here, click and drag, drop it into my swatches panel, and now it's in my swatches panel. And then if I wanted to apply that to this shape too, I can just select it there, and that will apply it. So you could make, like, for your leaves, you might have a couple of different greens, and then you could pop that into your swatches panel and apply it to your leaves or whatever you like. Do the same for your vase, all kinds of things. So have a play with making a nice arrangement. Play around with the colors, gradients, brushes. You can make it look however you like. Yeah, hopefully you've had fun with the pen tool, the pencil tool, brushes, and gradient tool. Okay, have fun. Bye.